Welcome everyone, and thanks for listening into our Architect Tomorrow virtual roundtable series. I'm Ryan Nappy, a marketing manager here at Tanium, and I'll be hosting today's session alongside our Chief IT Architect, Oliver Funk.
So for those of you who don't know Tanium, we are a unified endpoint management and security solution that allows organizations to manage their IT estate at speed and scale, so large organizations. So yeah, some unique capability, and right now we're helping a number of clients through challenging times from working from home and pivoting.
Thanks, Oliver. And so it's actually been 2 weeks since we last come together as a group to discuss topics concerning IT architects and how the companies that we work for are being affected by COVID-19. Since last time, I think we've seen the vast majority of the public take notice of our isolation restrictions, and we've been applauding the tireless work of our healthcare organisations worldwide. However, it's still unclear when the peak of the virus will hit certain countries, including here in the UK, and seeing our own Prime Minister go from being tested as positive into self-isolation and now into intensive care, it's a stark reminder that we are all still in uncertain times right now. This is affecting all of us personally, but also brings a vast array of challenges to our IT environments as well. And that's what we'll discuss as a group today. But first, let's go around the virtual room and meet all of our guests. If you could all share a small insight into your personal experience over the last couple of weeks working and living in isolation. And let's start with Petra and Luke, as they joined us a fortnight ago. So over to you, Petra.
Hi, I'm Petra Innesveld-Brown, independent consultant for enterprise architecture. So yes, I've been at home. I think I've been mostly homeschooling most of the time. I have a tremendous refound admiration for teachers and schools dealing with my kids on a daily basis. So I've been focusing mostly on looking at what's happening with the world, looking at what's happening, reactions from companies, and really what the response is from analysts, given that at the moment I'm actually not working given the IR35 situation in the UK.
Great, thanks Petra.
Hi, my name is Luke Panusz. I'm working for PGS Software as Chief Solutions Architect, delivering professional services across the cloud and data to various customers. And last week and even 2 weeks were crazy around number of meetings I had with the customers when parts of the dust started to went down. So everyone took basically step back and are trying to evaluate their digital strategies and approach to the market. Even the largest enterprises are holding back, looking at the cash flows and pretty much trying to predict what will happen. So a lot of conversations around the trends and where the market is going.
Great, thank you, Luke. And then welcome to our new guests as well, Guy and Koston. Could you please introduce yourselves and also tell us a little bit about your current situation? Guy, if you can go first.
Sure. I'm happy to be here, Ryan. My experience is I worked with several different type of architecture practices. Software architecture then becomes systems architecture and enterprise architecture. For the last 5 years, it's almost like I don't ever have the architect title, but I'm very much embedded with the architecture discipline. And what I focus on, bottom-up changes, finding opportunities, mostly with emerging technologies that has an impact with the enterprise, and very much focusing on the adoption of those technologies, not necessarily just what the strategy, but adopting it like pretty soon now. Current 2 years really much about decentralization, blockchain, distributed ledger technologies that I see happening. And currently, I am not embedded in an enterprise, but it's much more busier than ever, looking at decentralized organizations, working with the community and offering help as well where I can be useful. It's much more busier than ever. It feels maybe strangely business as usual as well.
Oh, well, welcome and thanks for joining us. And lastly, Koston.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. Thanks for having me on today. So I'm Koston Hill. I'm do business architecture and operating model work, looking at business transformations. I'm freelancing at the moment, covering doing some interim roles. And predominantly, my background is telecoms and a little bit of travel more recently as well, and kind of, I guess, a thirst for technology. My recent experience, I guess, echoes what we've heard already around trying to get the balance right between working and the homeschooling, and just trying to manage the way through the crisis like everybody else. Finding it difficult staring at the screen for long periods of time. That's how stuff gets done at the moment, really, for a lot of people in the service industry. So that's difficult, making sure you're taking the right breaks at the right time, really. So that's me. Thanks, Ryan.
Yeah, no, I can definitely echo that. We've taken the breaks. But yeah, thanks very much for joining us. Okay, great. So last time that we met, we spoke a lot about how organisations were dealing with the shock of finding themselves in a completely unprecedented situation, and in many cases having to close all physical offices as well as physical points of contact with customers and other stakeholders. And as a group, we concurred that businesses will need to start strategically thinking about how to move forward during these testing times, even though that's going to be pretty tricky. And over the last couple of weeks, we've seen some models emerging and being adopted by the Big Four consultants here in the UK, with reference to work from the likes of McKinsey, the BCG Group, and Gartner. Today, what we'll do is we'll introduce these three models and discuss the impact their adoption could have on business in today's climate. So to kick off the discussion, Oliver, if I hand over to you, could you explain a little bit and introduce us to the models, the V, U model, and L model?
Yeah, of course, Ryan. Yeah. So like many, I'm sure, I've been doing quite a bit of reading, and there does seem to be sort of this common theme of these three models. They may not be described in the same way, but there's quite a lot of reference now to these V, U, and L models. And they are economic models, right? And this is something we need to sort of discuss, as you said, the impact that these may have on businesses and consumer behavior and so on. But essentially, in the summary, what they look like is as follows. You have a V-shaped model, which is essentially where the trajectory of growth has a blip and then comes back to where it was before and continues growing at the same rate it was before. And this, by the way, this is a Harvard Business Review, a HBR article I'm looking at right now, and in it also talks about the fact that the majority of the other pandemics or the other major viruses we've had, like SARS and so on, have all had a V-type effect. So they're saying, whilst it's not, it's not a dead cert, of course, we don't know what's going to happen. They're saying there's a lot of evidence that points towards the impact being more V-shaped, where things go back to normal after a blip in output. The U model is what they call the ugly sibling of V, where the shock persists. While the initial growth is resumed, there's some permanent loss of output. So in other words, you don't quite get back to where you were before, but you do get to a recovery trajectory that's very similar to one we were on before, if not the same. And then the L shape they describe as very ugly, and the poor relation of V and U. And it's L because instead of coming back up, it's kind of got a longer path back to recovery. And clearly this would have a far more significant structural impact on the economy and on businesses, on the labour market, on raising funds to commercially fund things, and personal finance and so on. So this is the more pessimistic model, which would probably require businesses to do more rethinking, and would be the more challenging model, certainly. So those are the three models. As I say, they are economic models, and I think we probably need to think about what those different scenarios might mean for organisations, perhaps how we spot them, and how organisations might think about the architecture roadmap to kind of deal with those different scenarios.
Great, thanks a lot for that, Oliver. So to kick off then, going around the room, have we seen any examples today of organisations, of large companies that have been acting in a way that looks like they've maybe taken on like a V shape or a U? Has anybody seen anything that they'd like to illustrate
I've had some feedback from somebody I spoke to, actually not here in the UK, but a large retail business that's saying, look, they are doing more business than ever, really, because of what's happening. So I think there are certain industries that are just going to be more affected. But what I also see is that there's many people that in my community that I hear have been furloughed or they've been put aside, and therefore smaller organizations are definitely struggling more than larger organizations who have maybe more cash flow, more resilience than the smaller to medium enterprise.
Great, thank you. So Luke, have you seen anything?
Yes, I did, and basically we all have to be aware that in current times that LU and V model is very dependent on the industry and actually market region, because regards the V shape, one of my customers from the logistic side that was handling pretty much international traffic and delivery of the goods, for some time during initial 2 weeks of the pandemic outbreak, had problems with the business. They pretty much stopped all the operational side. They lost a couple of the customers. But when the dust went down and the goods started to be delivered once again back to stores and to the governments as well, they've bounced back and they are on the recovery curve in pretty good shape. So they started even again to invest into IT more heavier, to transform and be prepared for even larger traffic than before. So that's a perfect example for that industry. On the other hand, I'm working also with the travel. So on the travel, the prediction is that those are the most toughest time ever, and they will be recovering much more into L shape, so long term, and they are trying to prepare a strategy how to survive and bounce back when the markets and skies will open again.
So regarding insight from large medium companies, I would say, like, definitely I agree with Petra. For small companies, it's much of a firefighting mode at the moment and trying to stay afloat. What I see is with my conversations within the industry, I see definitely the CISO office, information security, and the risk departments going double and triple in their workflow, to that being it hectic more than ever, as they have always been. This is from like financial, definitely. The other aspect I see, and this has always been the case, right? Like looking for opportunities when there is small or large change within the markets, within the industry. So I see it more and more, actually. Funny enough, this time I'm not in the enterprise side, but outside, looking at those decentralization aspects of it. And what I mean by that, maybe you realize, like, now there's a lot of like hackathons, ideation, and funding launches regarding like how do we deal with crisis, the change that are being presented to us, and the changes that we want to stay. And I see a lot of companies being there, reinsurance, for example, pretty much important for them, what's happening. This is their business. But it's not only reinsurance, healthcare. I'm seeing those companies being in these decentralized ideation, adoption, opportunities, initiatives, pretty much more. Like I see maybe 3 launches every day.
It's interesting, isn't it, Guy? Because essentially every organization, every large organization now is kind of operating like a decentralized one.
Yes.
At least for their knowledge workers, right? Their knowledge workers are all working on an internet connection, essentially like, you know, a decentralized open source initiative. So it's quite interesting, isn't it, to kind of imagine how that might persist. Yeah.
It is really much making the challenge and the opportunity much more real and prominent for the enterprises. That definitely is a thing I see as a heavy signal at the moment. It might change, but it's currently at this moment. The other third thing I see, which is maybe like a signal that is not very important, but my Facebook feed is like cluttered with jobs around portfolio rationalization. It's just I keep having those. I guess people are like looking at what is not relevant. Maybe like it's BAU to look at what's not relevant, but this time I think it's like much more. We are looking a bit more bigger lens. What is not relevant to today? So definitely that's the third signal that I see.
That's really interesting. Well, and that's actually really good to a point we'll move on to shortly. But so just looking at what we've seen out there, Koston, have you got anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think anyone will disagree. The first part of the models are correct, are they? The LV and the U, where we've taken a short, sharp shock, and you can see that that's obvious on the stock market. What's happening with the jobs, the furloughs that are now starting to take place. I think it's going to be interesting to see, and this is where some of the models are going to be useful. If you can maybe ascertain from your individual company perspective your return trajectory, and you can plan a little bit better around that. And I guess maybe there's some indicators that you can look at to determine where you're going to be on there. I think the market's still quite volatile at the moment out there. If you look at the FTSE, the Dow Jones, and the key stock market indicators are doing, they're still quite volatile. So it's not really clear that we've kind of settled down, and that are we at the bottom of the LU and the V yet? That's hard to say, I think, because of the volatility in the market still. Yesterday was a good day on all the markets, but it's, you know, when you're jumping around 5, 7, 10% in a day on the markets, that's a strong indicator that there's still a lot of volatility there. I think Luke called it out, the travel industry, the tourism sector, hospitality, all kind of ran into this very hard, kind of full pace, and it hit the coronavirus, and that kind of put a real hard stop on a lot of those industries. So I think that they're going to be, as Luke called out, I think that they're going to be maybe following a longer L tail. These industries might take a while to come back up to speed as well, where you've got fleets of aircraft grounded to bring them back up to speed, and so on. And it's going to really depend, I think, your recovery return based on, again, Luke talked about this a little bit, around what sector you're in. Are you in travel? Are you in healthcare? Are you providing essential services? Where your geography is in. There's different. I think there's different timelines going to happen across the country and internationally. Your customers, who you're serving as your customer base, is going to have a big impact on what your recovery model looks like. And then also, I think critically, what your business model is. Are you trading in those kind of physical goods? Are you manufacturing, engineering, all the way up to those platform-based models, which I think are probably going to be a little bit more shielded. Again, depending on what their customer looks like, a little bit more shielded from the effects of Corona. I think telco, because it's, I guess, probably classed as an essential service these days, with the communications, the infrastructure that it provides. They're probably, I think, kind of sat there ticking over, trying to put more capacity in, trying to keep things ticking over, do the repairs in the field that are required for the masts, the cell sites, and keeping that infrastructure ticking over. And I think that's logistically difficult as well in these times. So I think that those are my initial perspectives that I would share around.
Yeah, great. Yeah, and we'll move on to how we can look at certain sectors and how they potentially could pivot, or what we might see in the coming months for some sectors that are going to be in a more of an L-shape type scenario. But just coming back to Petra, did you have a point you wanted to add?
Yeah, I think one of the points that we really didn't make was how well prepared our organisations to actually respond to these situations. And one of the questions we asked ourselves was around our organisations that were using enterprise architecture in a better position to actually change and respond to these situations. So do they have more insight? Do they have more capability to actually change faster? And also, how can architects respond and support organizations in in moving faster if they need to now. And just quickly, I think in response to some of the other things that were said is I think a lot of it is down to customer response, and I think you're going to talk about that in a minute, Ryan. But I think a lot of the industries that we mentioned are the ones that aren't in people's priority right now. They don't need it right now. We don't need to travel right now just because of practical reasons, but also would people be in a right mindset to go traveling right now. So I think a lot is down to what people can absorb and do right now.
So Petri makes some interesting points, and it reminds me that I got a bit of criticism actually after we posted some of the content over the last couple of weeks that this wasn't a Black Swan event, because actually in the Black Swan book they talk about a pandemic as being the sort of thing you can prepare for. And so actually, maybe this is a grey swan event, right? As in, it's an event that people should have planned for, and that if their risk management and their enterprise architecture and business continuity plans were in place, then it should have been something that they should have been able to respond to. But the reality is the impact is effectively the same as if it was a Black Swan event, right? So it's kind of a bit of a semantic point, but I thought it was worth raising because this kind of human aspect, which I know we're going to come on to, and how it drives people to behave differently, I think is ultimately going to cascade into all the different industries. But of course, I mean, Koston's already made the point that different industries will be impacted differently. But I think ultimately all of us, are human, and all of us have, consumer behavior regardless of where we sit and act. And it was interesting, Gaia, you talking about your Facebook feed. I think across the board, of course, it's no surprise that social media has kind of had a massive uptick. I mean, I pretty much stopped using Facebook until this all happened, because I just saw it as a time sink. But now it's a great way of keeping in touch with people that I want to keep in touch with. So it's kind of interesting that the dynamics, even for those platform businesses we touched on earlier, are going to change as well, right? But useful.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's a really interesting point. I mean, the human element of it. And I think whilst we're looking at these models, it's great for us to, from an economic standpoint, to look at how businesses are going to bounce back to business as usual. But with any models, there are limitations. So I think it'd be interesting to explore what limitations do you think we've got here when we think about the people element and how organizations are going to be able to pivot.
I think the impact I heard 4 days ago, and so it's an old number, but 4 days ago in Europe, 40,000 people had died, and the workforce is going to be so massively impacted by that. Everybody's going to have lost friends, family, and I think what I read, I think it was in one of the grade 4, I don't know exactly which one it was, I was reading all the articles, that leaders need to be human first before anything else now, rather than, yes, we do need to understand and get business back on track, but we need to be human first. However, I'm seeing also very small reactions, even in my own environment, about people saying, we need more discounts for the school fees. Should we be paying our little clubs? And, that is happening, and that will have a knock-on effect because people are really thinking about themselves, and that kind of goes back to what you said earlier as to what people's needs are right now.